Hello everybody, so we're back with another Frequently Asked Questions Friday. So please hit the subscription bell notification thingy down here somewhere, and of course go to Produce Like a Pro. You can sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies. So let's get started with Frequently Asked Questions Friday. So when does low end become too much low end? Wow, I mean, how do I answer that? I mean, it's one of those things, if it doesn't translate from speaker to speaker and it's blowing up everywhere, it's too much low end. I think this is where I differ from a lot of like the professional YouTubers and lots of guys I respect as well. So I'm not trying to be negative, but I like the car test. I love the car test. When you don't know your room and you don't know your headphones or you don't know your listening environment, the car test rules. And I have sat and done the car test with numerous amazing mixers. Just letting you know, I've done it with some of the biggest mixers in the world. We've gone and sat in a car and listened to the mix because it's really good for low end. Now, obviously a 90s, 80s car with a little tiny little stereo system like this, but most, maybe not all, but most modern sound systems have an extended low end. What does that mean? It means if your low end is too big, it will blow up in there. Every car I've ever had, my wife's car, my car, well, we only have one car now, we share one, my wife's car, but even when I had cars, I used to go in there and listen and the low end would just blow up. It would just be insane. So the car test is one way to tell. Go and try it in loads of different environments. If it's too much, it's too much. It's obvious. Now, don't get me wrong. There are genres of music, and maybe this is where your question is going, like reggae, of course, that have enormous amounts of low end. But you need to create space. If you've got this huge low end, it's usually got it's got this really spacious guitar part, this really spacious drum part. Maybe the drummer is just playing side stick. You know, there's room for that bass to grow. However, that huge bass with some death metal guitars on it is going to blow up your speakers. So I think it's a case of genre. It's genre dependent. You know, is there space enough to have the bass be the biggest thing in the world? And then the other thing is do the car test. Do the listen through earbuds, listen through headphones, go to your friend's stereo. If you don't know your room and you don't know how much low end is going on, then go and try it in a bunch of different environments. I mean, tell us, what is your experiences? What do you do for low end? You know, I'd love to know what you do to make sure the low end is just right for you. What do you make of the whole top-down mixing mastering thing? Okay, so we talked about this just recently, and I wasn't trying to talk about top-down mixing in particular, and that's a terminology that I've only recently been hearing. I think it's more about overdoing your master bus. Most guys and girls that you love and listen to, mixers, tend to use very little on their master bus. They might use gentle compression and a little bit of boom and fizz. I mean, Crystal Algae's mixing, he's using his SSL master bus and he's getting 2 or 3 dBs worth of gain reduction. And I've looked over behind him and he's got some Pultex on there and he's hitting some 70 and maybe some 10 or 12, a little boom and fizz, as we like to say. And he's mixing into that, definitely getting 2 or 3 dBs worth of gain reduction. But all the other compression that's going on is going on at individual channels before hitting the master bus. That's very typical for any mixer. We just finished a song. In fact, it's still up there and I didn't put anything on till the very, very end. I finally put some, and I actually used a little bit of a T-Rax. I used a little couple of dB compression on the old T-Rax Classic and a little bit of boom and fizz, a bit of 60 and a bit of 12, and that was it. So I treated it pretty much the same way I would if I was mixing on a console. And I think that's quite typical. So for me, if you're going to put ozone on your mix bus and mix into it, you basically are just softening everything and you may get a good result, but you're never going to get something as good as treating individual elements properly, getting them balanced, getting them EQ'd so they sit really, really well together, and then send them to your mix bus and maybe put a little bit of compression and EQ on there. You can mix into a little bit of compression and EQ, but make sure it's just exaggerating that little extra boom and fizz, minimal amounts of stuff. If it's too harsh, find out where it is in the mix. If there's too much low mids going on, find out where the low mids are. If it's booming all over the place, find out on the low end where something is out of control. Do it in the elements leading up to the mix. Don't try and solve it on your master bus. A mastering engineer's job is to do that. And honestly, they're doing tiny little things. They're not sitting there using like Ozone, and don't get me wrong, I like Ozone. It is a great plugin, but you're going to get a much better mix if you mix into the mix bus with hardly anything on it and save the mastering process for another day or another occasion. Mix the best you possibly can, solving all the issues up to the master bus. Regarding compression, it's typical to compress a bass recording. What other circumstances would you prefer to see the compression having been used on the way in as opposed to being done in the box? Honestly, I am fine with any kind of compression as long as it suits the recording. If I'm doing a very, very dense pop song or a dense rock song, then printing with a little bit extra compression isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's going to come up on the console or, virtually on your DAW pretty close to what you want. Now, if you don't print any compression and it's very, very dense, then you're going to have really dynamic things that are coming up and down in volume, instruments, vocals, and whatever, and you're going to apply a lot of compression just to get things heard. So I don't have a problem with doing it on many, many instruments. When you go and work with Tim Pierce, for instance, he has his whole setup. You should check out his videos online. They're really amazing. He has his whole setup going, and he is printing with beautiful mic pre's, beautiful microphones, and really nice compression. He's got it dialed in. He's his own producer and engineer of guitar. And he gives me tones that I pretty much pull up in the mix, and they sound great. He's got just the right amount of compression on there. He's got the right amount of EQ, the right mic placement. He is an engineer and producer of his own guitar playing. So that's a great instance. Vocals. When I print vocals, I do print them with compression on. Sometimes when I'm testing out, mic pre's and microphones and stuff, I won't really put any compression on it because I want you to hear what they sound like. But generally, I compress going on the way in, at least enough to reduce the dynamic range so it's not insane, so that I'm printing almost inaudible to super loud, because some singers, like it or not, they haven't got the right mic technique. They haven't got the right vocal technique quite yet, but it doesn't make them a bad singer. Everybody started from somewhere. Some of our favorite ever singers were unbelievably dynamic on their first couple of albums. It was the touring, it was the record making process that got them to be good enough to sing with all of that control. So being critical of a 21-year-old being overly dynamic is a very naive thing for us to think, because every 21-year-old, or most of them, went through that process. So that's why compressing on the way in is okay. It is a good technique. I think it's great to be able to pull things up in your DAW, on your virtual mixer there, and hear things pretty close. You've just got to be careful that the compression isn't so aggressive that it chokes the life out of things. That's really kind of all you really need to be doing there. What is your favorite compressor plugin and why? I think it's several. I use the R compressor every day. The Renaissance compressor, the Waves one. It's subtle. It does what I want it to do. I frankly will reach for the Bomb Factory when I want to just apply a little bit of compression. The stock one. And I think that this is a good point, is sometimes the stock compressor in your DAW is the best thing for the job in many, many situations. Ones that I like that have got a bit more personality. I love the MJUC. The Klanghelm, I think it's a fantastic plugin. Really, really like that plugin. Because it's got three distinct compressors, and you can saturate them, you can make them dark or light. It's got a hi-fi and a dark setting. It's really, really fantastic. That is a good special effects one. But most of the time I'm looking over at the session. There's a bunch of R comps on it, a couple Bomb Factory 1176s on it. And, those are things I typically reach for. I'll also, use obviously the MV2, but I wouldn't necessarily call that a compressor. It's because you can take the low level signal and expand it, and the high level and compress it. It's kind of a 2-in-1. The MV2, the Waves MV2, that's one of my favorite, tools for pretty much everything. I was talking to David from Mixbus about that, and that video will be coming out soon. And when I asked him about a couple of plugins, that came up with him. That and the Klanghelm we're both huge fans of. There are certain plugins that just do an amazing job. But please don't overlook your stock plugin. Look, I really like the IK 1176 because it's got an extra grit to it. So it means if I don't want to EQ something, I'll pull it out and just make it a little brighter without using a compressor and an EQ. It just adds a little extra grit. It's got that gritty 1176 kind of thing. It's a bit more exaggerated than my real 1176, so I love it. So I think it's a little bit horses for courses. I would say explore your stock compressors. I think you'll get amazing results. And then the Klanghelm, the MV2, Renaissance compressor, IK 76, they're all great compressors. And there's a lot. I think just start getting through it, acquire things slowly, kind of get used to things, learn what they're good for. Don't overwhelm yourself and get 40 compressors and then try them all out. Get used to one. You're going to find that every compressor is going to have something it's really, really good for, and some are going to be good for lots of things. Please don't forget to subscribe. Leave some comments and questions below. What are your sort of tricks with using compression? I'd love to know some more. On heavy prog material with lots of time changes, would you automate compression settings or would you aim for a global setting? Oh, that's a pretty awesome question. I love that stuff. I'd automate, definitely automate. I think that I love automating plugins. I love being able to change attack and release times. We were talking to Junkie XL the other day, and he was saying because he can't and he doesn't use anything on his master bus, he doesn't use any compression or EQ on there. When he has to do like side chaining things, he has to draw them all in as automation because he has to print stems out separately for movies because he's mixing all of his stuff as well as composing and performing everything. He also mixes his stuff, which is fantastic. So it's a good lesson that, you have to do what you have to do. So if you've got something which is super fast, tempo changes, and you have an attack and release that works really, really perfectly with it, comes to a different section and you want to have that feel, yeah, automate your attack and release. I love doing that. Automating threshold, automating attack and releases, automating outputs, all of this kind of stuff is fun and it makes the music better when you can get into that kind of detail. So yes, with different tempo changes and time, whatever it might be, definitely get in there and automate that attack and release and anything else that makes your music great. Automation really is the secret to a great mix. At what sample rates do you set your interface for tracking? I, for years, have been working at 48K. There's a reality that we need to be tracking at 88.2 and 96 because that is future-proofing. We're upgrading all of our system shortly, and that is something that I really, really have to do. I have to upgrade it to something because the reality is that major labels now are asking for everything to be done at I think minimum 88.2 or 96K because they have to future-proof themselves for immersive audio. There's going to be a lot, that's really going to start coming out now, a lot of discussion on that. And I know it's difficult because if you're running at 48K, you get a lot more DSP, you've got a lot more plugins you can open, a lot more stuff you can do because it's not, overloading your CPU. So 88.2 and 96K and above is really going to tax your CPU. But let's face it, the world is getting better. Computers are getting cheaper, they're getting faster, they're getting more powerful. So I've muddled through. I've got a cheese grater down there, a pretty old Mac that we're going to upgrade the power of. But apparently, I've been told they're saying I think it's December 2019, there's going to be a new tower. Fingers crossed. But anyway, regardless, I'm at 48K most of the time, but I am having to move to much higher sample rates because the reality is you have to future-proof yourself. Because in the world of immersive and all the kind of stuff that's coming up fast and furious, you need to be working at these higher sample rates. How do you deal with low mid-range? I mean, trying to get rid of muddiness and not losing the power which this frequency contributes to the mix. It's finding where it is. That's why you do not do it on your master bus. That's why you never just because you've just pointed out why we don't do it on the master bus. Because if you pull the 350 kind of area out on the master bus, you're removing the mud out of everything. Out of the drums, it's fantastic. Take 350, nice wide chunk out of drums, makes toms sing, boom, makes the bottom end bloom, keeps the attack above that. It's great on the kick drums, anywhere from like 250 to 400, pulling that out, makes that thumping 60 hertz come through, fantastic. So that's the secret. It's pulling the mud out of instruments that want it removed. Don't just globally do it to your mix bus. As you're pointing out, you'll take the low mids out of things that don't need it. Low mids on guitars is really nice. Low mids on basses can be really, really nice. It's really ugly in lots of other things. So that's the secret. Take it out of the things that need it removed from. Do not do it globally on your mix bus, or as you are pointing out, you will ruin the whole sound of your mix. You'll lose the thickness. Does it make a difference if you EQ before or after reverb? I think if I apply the EQ, like the Abbey Road, you know, everything up to about 600 and then everything maybe like 4 or 5K, if I apply that before the reverb, it sounds less artificial. It sounds like I'm adding a sound, and so there will always be a little extra low end that's generated in the convolution or the involution or whatever they call it of the reverb. That will be generated, but it will be less excessive. There'll be some high end that's generated above 6K, you know, from the reverb itself, but it will be less excessive. If after that you still want to narrow it down even more, I sometimes put a EQ after as well, but I like to EQ going in because then I'm controlling it. I do that with a lot of things. If I'm doing a bass boost, I don't just put an R bass on a bass guitar or a tom to get that low end. I EQ going into it. So I remove really tight the area on the tom and then I boost the low end afterwards. To me, it's like controlling it going on the way in is the number one thing. And then again, if you want to get that reverb and wipe the top and bottom off a little bit more, then you can do it afterwards. But always start by feeding the reverb the signal you want. And if it's not quite enough for you, then of course you can either use the EQ setting, which comes in most reverbs these days, or you can put an EQ afterwards. Wonderful questions. Absolutely marvelous. Great to have you back for another Fact Friday. Please, as ever, hit the subscription, please like the video. That would be amazing. Go to Produce Like a Pro, sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies, and let us know what your experiences are with all of these questions. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.